So let me get this straight. Cottonmouth gets out of jail, Mariah kills Cottonmouth, and then Luke Cage is shot with a Chitauri bullet that leaves him bleeding in the streets? What the fuck happened? In this week's episode of Luke Cage, one villain dies and two appear from the shadows. One, we get the origins of Black Mariah herself, Mariah Dillard, who ends up becoming one hell of a creepy chick in this episode when in a fit of rage, she kills her cousin. Although, I honestly think he had it coming, he went down a pretty dark path, and you get to see a lot of that in this episode, the full backstories of both Cottonmouth and Mariah. On top of that, Luke Cage has run into some big trouble, because Cottonmouth knows his entire background about how he escaped from prison, and he's definitely going to plan and use that against him. And to top it all off, the episode ends with Luke Cage being seemingly sniped from afar with the Judas bullet. The Chitauri bullet, the only weapon so far that we've seen in the series that can actually harm Luke Cage, and he gets knocked down hard in this episode. Aside from a lot of those key moments, the biggest thing about this episode is getting to see the backstory of Cottonmouth, getting to see where he did his very first kill, not to mention his affiliation with Dillard and her family, and of course, the very evil Mother Mabel, who is just terrifying in this episode. The scene where she cuts off that dude's finger, that was pretty damn brutal. So back in the day, Cottonmouth had been picked up by this family, and basically he was being groomed by them to be the next generation of gangsters. He was looked after by Mother Mabel, and his Uncle Pete, and of course his cousin, Mariah. Now, what's really interesting about this backstory is we get to see that at the beginning, it almost seems as if he wasn't going to go down the gangster route. In fact, his Uncle Pete actually tried to sort of groom his music skills. As we've already seen, he's really great at playing the piano and could have had a future in it. I have to say it's really interesting to see a female gangster. Like, you don't see those too often, at least in movies or in TV. And I have to say, she's pretty damn horrifying. Like I said, that scene where they bring in that young guy and they cut off his finger just to make an example, and then they bring him out back and they force Cottonmouth to actually shoot him. This scene's really important because it's sort of like the turning point for his character, and you get to see that he's visibly shaken up by this when he walks out into the room and he has blood all over his hands and he goes over to the piano and starts to play. It's really creepy how Mother Mabel comes up from behind him, grabbing his hands, basically smearing the blood all over hers, basically saying, we're in this together, this is all about family, and then it segues back to him actually playing piano. That scene sent chills down my spine, but the biggest event of this episode is another flashback sequence where apparently Uncle Pete's been doing some bad shit. Not only has he been actually molesting Mariah, but he's also sold a lot of information to a rival gang, so Mother Mabel decides that he's gotta go. And of course, Cottonmouth is going to be the one to kill him. The only person who actually tried to look out for his well-being, even though at the end of the day, you know, Uncle Pete exactly wasn't the nicest guy in the world, Cottonmouth had to off him. The scene all comes crashing down when we go back to the present, where Cottonmouth is confronted by his cousin, and he says one wrong thing just to piss her off, because she's trying to get him to forget all about Luke Cage. Let this whole thing go, and everything's just going to be fine. But there's no way that he's going to allow that to happen. His anger gets the best of him, and he actually mentions that one time she was actually flirting with Uncle Pete. This just instantly sends her into a rage, and she pushes him through this window in his nightclub. He falls down to the dance floor. She then comes back down and then just continuously beats him until he dies. This scene is great. What I also love about it is that there's a lot of build-up to it. At the beginning of the episode, she's losing her political power, and there's a scene in the middle of the episode where she's confronted by Shades, who's basically drawing out her inner dark side. It's really fun to see that happen. His interactions with her are pretty great, and the fact that he still works for someone who's actually a little more higher up frickin' Diamondback is even crazier. And I may or not be right or wrong on this, but like at the end of the episode when Luke Cage is shot with a Chitauri bullet, I think the sniper is actually Diamondback. I think that's actually the actor they got to play him, and this will be our very first glimpse of this guy, and what an entrance it is. He's the guy who actually shot Luke Cage and did some damage. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Luke Cage? Well, there pretty much is the episode right there in a nutshell. Just a lot of big shocking moments. When things looked like they were finally going to start getting better, they actually only got worse. The death of Cottonmouth just brought about even more problems. Diamondback, Mariah Dillard is now even more crazier than ever, and Luke Cage getting shot by the Judas bullet was definitely something I wasn't expecting in this episode at least. I thought they were going to build it up maybe just a little bit more, and I can't wait to see how he's going to recover from these traumatic events, especially when he realized that there's really nowhere for him to run anymore. I also really love the conversation that both him and Claire were having at the very end of the episode about him not actually wearing a costume, because that will allow him to be closer to the people of the streets. They won't fear him because they'll actually know him. He's not just going to be covered up by a mask. And historically in the comics, as far as I know, Luke Cage has never actually had like a traditional superhero outfit. He basically just wears a yellow shirt, and that's what's really interesting about him. He doesn't need a costume. He blends in with society. He's just another one of them. He just happens to have some really kick-ass superhuman abilities. So this was a great episode of Luke Cage, thrilling from beginning to end. I loved all of the flashback sequences, which in many ways were kind of a death flag for Cottonmouth. I just had a feeling that he was going to be brought down by Luke Cage, but it actually ended up being his cousin, someone who's being groomed to be evil since the very first episode of the series, and man did she come out swinging. She's basically the next coming of Mother Mabel, and this was another awesome episode of Luke Cage. I really enjoyed this one a lot, probably my favorite one in the last couple episodes, so I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 5. I totally recommend it to people who've been following the show, and if you're looking for a new superhero Marvel show, check out Luke Cage. It's pretty freaking awesome. So 5 out of 5 for me. I loved it, but I want to hear from you guys. What did you guys think about this week's episode of Luke Cage? How is Luke going to survive being shot by the Judas bullet? Were you shocked by Cottonmouth's death in this episode? What do you want to see from the rest of Luke Cage and the brand new Marvel series that are to come? Please tell me in the comment section below. You guys are awesome! Thank you for watching this review. I really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave me a comment. I will see you guys next time. And as always, stay dandy, baby.